Okay, because I somehow, I'm not a technology wizard. So I have an iPad where I'm seeing these things, but I don't know how to maneuver in and out. I turned the camera off and then somehow camera came on, but I don't know how to go to where the presentation things are. So everybody, sorry about my user errors. I'd like to introduce for folks who didn't attend the last session from Teresa. Is Teresa Glenna from TV Sud. She's been global market access area for over 15 years. She's now with TV Sud. She's one of our, I would say, regular. She always comes in and do one, two, or three presentations, and she's always flexible. That I like that I can switch around at the last moment where somebody else has a scheduling conflict. So Teresa is pretty good at what she does and what she knows. Teresa, take away.
Thank you, Bonzi. Appreciate it. All right, so let me share my screen and we will get started. Okay, let me know if you can see my screen and we will be all set.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Great, thanks, Monrad. Okay, so this session we're talking about regulatory changes in Saudi Arabia and South Africa. And I guarantee you I'm going to mix up these words because I made a mistake and put two countries that have the initials SA in one presentation. So bear with me as I stumble over my words occasionally. All right, so we'll get started here, and the scope of today's presentation is, first we'll talk about the old SASO versus CoC scheme. There's something called an IECEE certificate, the SASO energy efficiency regulation, and then the CITC wireless for Saudi Arabia. And then once we finish Saudi Arabia, we'll get into South Africa. So first we'll talk about the old SASO CoC versus the SALEEM scheme. So back in 2004, there was a decree, or a Ministry of Commerce and Industry issued a decree to regulate products as they came into the market in Saudi Arabia. So this required all shipments of products that are under the regulation to have a certificate of conformity in order to pass through customs and enter into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, KSA. In April of 2019, the SABER SALEEM scheme was implemented as the new conformity assessment program, and this is replacing the previous CoC scheme. So the program is offered as a gradual implementation process, and we're actually quite well into the process. I think I have that on the next slide. Yes. So for products that are implemented under the SALEEM scheme, they no longer can use the old SASO CoC scheme. But if the regulation has not yet been issued for a product, then it still can be imported using the old SASO CoC scheme. But it's planned that all products will eventually fall under the SALEEM system. So the differences are listed here. The old SASO CoC was initiated either by the importer or the exporter, where for SALEEM, it's only initiated by the real importer, the actual importer. For the CoC, each shipment was accompanied by a certificate of conformity. And in the new scheme, there are several different certificates that may be required depending on the product. So there is what's called product certificate. So all regulated products require a product certificate. There's a shipment certificate. The shipment certificate is required for every single shipment, whether it is regulated products or not. And then in addition to that product certificate, some products require some additional certification, like a GCC certificate, which is I think it's called Gulf Coast Coalition, the GMARC certificate, or some require an IECEE equivalency certificate, which is not the same as a CV scheme, by the way. It's different. It's a certificate issued by Saudi Arabia. So we'll go over some of that in a little bit. But those, if it falls under certain categories, then those certificates are required as a prerequisite to get the product certificate. The factory audit is not mandatory for the old CoC scheme, but there are some specified product categories that do require a factory audit. Automotive components is one of those. In the old system, certificate or shipment inspections were required for especially high-risk products, but now it's not required. It's covered in this more extensive certification process, and you only need an invoice, and it's an invoice verification process as it goes through customs. So it's quite a bit different, and in that sense, it's easier now, but the upfront work is a little more extensive. Previous scheme was hard copy certificates that were delivered by hand to the importer. Now it's an electronic certificate that's issued, and it can be issued in one day. It's a lot faster now. The previous platform was the certificates were issued from a notification body or a notified body. Now they are issued via the SABER platform, which is the system where the importers are registered, and the certificate is issued right in that computer software system. So we use two words here for the new system. We use SABER and we use SALEEM, and this is how I remember. SABER is the platform, SALEEM is the scheme. They kind of rhyme. So SABER is yeah, that platform. And the validity, the previous COCs were for each shipment. Now we have two different types of approvals. So the product certificate is good for 1 year, and then the shipment certificate is for each shipment. Okay. So the SALEEM SABER process, it starts with the registration of the importer. The importer is in control of this process, actually. So if you have more than one importer, they each need to register in the SABER system, SALEEM SABER portal. The second step, the importer will add products under their registration that they plan to import. The next step is for products that require a product certificate, you submit all of the documentation required to get that product certificate. And then the final step is the shipment certificate, and this is based on a matchup of the commercial invoice. So for products that do not require a product certificate, that are considered uncontrolled products, then they skip that step 3, stage 3. The couple different type approval schemes. So there's this 1A type approval, and this is pretty straightforward, where it's, you know, just the process that I showed on the last slide. Importer registration, product listing, product certificate issued, shipment certificate issued. The type approval 3 is for products that require an audit. So again, I said automotive components. that is one of the product categories that have this type 3 of approval. So this requires, after the importer registration and the product listing, an audit. So over to the right, it shows the requirements for the audit, the documentation requirements. So you'll notice that an ISO 9000 certificate or ISO 16949 are required for automotive. And then the other technical documentation is also required on a sample in some cases. So in addition to automotive parts, building products are under this type 3 approval, but most of your IT, household, lab equipment are going to fall under the type 1A approval. Oh, here I list more products. So additional requirements, the regulated or non-regulated products is based on harmonized tariff code. So, or HS code, harmonized shipping code. This is the code that you use to determine the amount of import tax, if you're not familiar, and your shipping department should have this code. But also SALEEM, SABER is based on what that HS code is. So I have basically two lists. One is a list of regulated and one is a list of non-regulated. So if you're not sure, send me your HS code and I can check for you. Quality management certificate is needed in some cases. In most products, it's voluntary, but in situations like gas appliances and building materials, it is mandatory. This is quality management. This GCC certificate is required for the list 2 appliances and toys that are under the GCC mandatory rules. An IECEE equivalency certificate is needed for some products like lighting, telecom, and batteries. And these are not, there are some additional categories as well. And a plastic certificate is needed for some plastic parts. And then finally, the SABER certification scheme, type A or 3 or 5 are determined also by HS code. So the factory inspections are required for lifts, for lighting, for personal protection equipment, gas appliances, and I also mentioned some automotive parts and building materials as well. SALEEM family grouping is here. You have to have a product that are similar main characteristics and components. You have to have the same manufacturer and brand name and the same country of origin for the factory. So if you have a family of products and it meets these criteria, they can be grouped in one certificate. The application documents are listed here. So for the initial registration in SALEEM SABER, we do need the importer's information. We then need the information for your product certificate. So this is an application form, EOC. Your commercial invoice and packing list is for the shipment certificate. You need a test report issued by an ISO 17025 accredited laboratory. Internal test reports are not accepted, except in some rare cases where a standard is not harmonized. We do need photos of the product, but if you submit a test report, generally that's enough photos of the product. We also need a photo of the product label to ensure that the country of origin is acceptable to ship to Saudi Arabia, and also a photo of the packaging and the shipment details, you know, how it's packed, how it's shipped, and the labeling that's on the packaging. We need some additional documents, technical documents, manuals, material safety data sheets, technical data sheets, and then again for type 3 and 5 schemes, a factory audit will be required in addition to these documents. Now, about this IECEE certificate, what is that? So this is a mandatory certificate that is to be accompanied with the certificate of conformity, the shipment certificate for clearance of the shipment at customs. It is a recognition certificate issued by SASO based on a valid CB test report, IECEE test report to an IEC standard. So this is, I like to call it an IECEE equivalency certificate, but it's really a certificate that says Saudi Arabia accepts your CB certificate. That's the gist of it. Kind of odd, but it is what it is. So this is required for certain products, and they have phased them in over time. So initially it was just for mobile phones and phone chargers, power banks. But then phase 2 was in August of 2018, which added mobile phone batteries, water pumps, dishwashers, TVs, watches, laptops. And then phase 3 was implemented last year, 2019, for lighting products, headphones, and smartwatches. So you can see that they're gradually adding products, but nothing has been added in 2020 so far. So it's unknown whether they're going to add more product categories to this list or not. So it's one to keep an eye on, and we're watching closely. So back to the certificate process. So for the IECEE equivalency certificate, it starts with the issuance of a CB test report and certificate. Then you submit an application with your CB report to SASO on an online system. SASO reviews all of the documents, and then SASO will issue the IECEE recognition certificate. So this is a separate process from the SALEEM process that we talked about during the first part of this presentation. But it is a prerequisite for products that require it to get this IECEE equivalency or recognition certificate prior to getting a product certificate and a shipment certificate. The application documents for the IECEE recognition certificate are listed here. It's basically the same type of information that you would have needed for your CB scheme test report. But in addition to that, you need the commercial license of your legal rep in Saudi Arabia, the factory license, so basically their business license. You need a CITC. This is the wireless certificate for mobile phones and other applicable products. And then you need your manuals in English and Arabic. Next, we'll talk about the energy efficiency regulation. So the EER energy efficiency is a registration certificate that's also issued by SASO for a specific list of products. Those products are listed here. Second presentation, your throat gets a bit dry. Sorry. So these have Saudi Arabia standards. They don't have harmonized standards listed, although this one for motors is a harmonized standard with the IEC. But the products need to be tested in SASO accredited test labs. The process is first, the testing is done at a SASO registered lab, then application on the SASO website, upload a test report, pay the fee. Note here that the fee needs to be paid by a bank in Saudi Arabia to SASO. So this is why the local representative is important and why many companies would come to a certification agency like TÜV in order to help them with the process. Make modifications if necessary. If everything is okay, then your certificate and energy efficiency card is issued electronically, and then you can put the energy efficiency label on your product. The restriction is that the test report has to be issued within 6 months of the date of issuance. And then here's that note about the bank account. So 1-year validity, which is consistent with the other certifications in Saudi Arabia. All right. Application documents for energy efficiency are listed here. Performance test report is key. And then your draft label. The marking needs to be on the product and also could be on your product, on your manual. It has to be, it has all the similar labeling requirements as any other compliance label, where it needs to be durable and legible, pass the marking durability testing. Okay, and the last topic for Saudi Arabia, before we move into South Africa, is the wireless scheme. Somebody just asked, what is the renewal process after 1 year when a certificate is expired? That is based on the same set of documentation. Renewals, as long as they're done prior to the expiration of the certificate, you can do a renewal without a brand new test report. If you let your certificate expire, you need a new test report that is less than 6 months old. Oops. All right, on to the wireless certification. CITC is the regulatory body, and they regulate telecommunications equipment, wireless equipment, and information technology equipment that is not wireless. The certification requirements are either system or modular. You can do a, if you have a wireless module that already has an approval, then you can do the approval based on that, and then your modular approval can be used in any end product, which is the easiest way to do it. In fact, if you submit modular test reports, they're going to give you an approval on the module itself. It's only if you do a submission with the end product only that they would do a certificate for your end product. You can submit European or IECEE test standards, and the testing needs to be done at an ILAC accredited test lab. ILAC is an organization that is tied to lab accreditations like NAVLAB or A2LA or the CV scheme IECEE accreditations. So there's a specific requirement here. So some labs are not ILAC accredited, so that's something to watch out for. And the certificate is issued to any applicant. It doesn't have to be a local representative. The typical required documentation is here. You need technical specifications. Safety is not always required. Sometimes it's required, but if it is, it must be an ILAC accredited lab again. So that standard must be in the lab's scope. the declaration from the manufacturer, and also a declaration letter from the ILAC test lab is required. And a authorization letter for if it's, you know, local rep or you're using an agent to do the application. And that covers all of our Saudi Arabia questions. I'm just going to roll through the list here. One question, will the presentation be available? Yes. As Bonzi mentioned at the beginning, the presentations are all available on the SPCE website for, I think, 2 months.
Yes.
Okay,
the
thanks,
presentations are available for 2 months. And also, if you want to go and visit our site again, I will have to make sure how would we give you the password and your login information. They'll be available if you have missed it or you want to repeat and see or download. It would be available for 2 months after today's session. So after this virtual thing for a week.
Thanks, Bonzi. Okay, Mike Sherman asked, is an ISO IEC test report required for all regulated products, and what about non-regulated products? So the answer is mostly yes. I can't say 100% yes, because I just ran into a product yesterday that was a non-IEC product, but it was a controlled product. So it was a component actually, and there was no harmonized standard for it. It was something to do with flow. It was a component that is about water flow. And in that case, the required testing could be any applicable test standard. It could even be the manufacturer's test. But if the product falls under a harmonized standard, then yes, the test report is required for the harmonized, you know, EN or IEC standard. For non-regulated products, they don't need a product certification. So whatever technical reports you have for the product are usually sufficient. It doesn't always require a EN or IEC report. Many times the non-regulated products don't have electrical aspects, because the SALEEM SABER scheme is for all products that are going through. So it could be, you know, housewares, textiles, it could be lots of different, it could be food, lots of different things that don't have those types of electrical standards. But from the scope that we're talking about here, generally it's regulated products need that IEC standard. And let's see, yeah, Gail says that these are complicated and burdensome. I would agree. Are you seeing evidence of companies deciding just not to ship to certain countries? Absolutely. A lot of times a company will come to us that is maybe smaller and doesn't have a huge budget for compliance. And, you know, they want to sell their product in other countries, but in many cases it's cost prohibitive for them. So it's not even about being complicated and burdensome, because that's why you have us. We're here to help you get through the process. We do this every day. So I mean, I hope you can understand from me, I do my best to make it easy, to break it down and explain it in a way that's easy to understand. So that's my passion. It's the cost usually that's prohibiting companies from going into other countries. So it's not really about the process. And we try our best to warn you up front if it's more of a complicated process. Jessica says that I saw a note in the overview that Hebrew was prohibited in Saudi Arabia. We have some products with Hebrew to meet Israeli requirements. That's right. So Hebrew, Israel and Saudi Arabia, as you hopefully know, are not really getting along. So basically anything that has to do with Hebrew or Israeli requirements cannot be on the product going to Saudi Arabia. If a product is made in Israel, it cannot be shipped to Saudi Arabia. So that's one of the reasons why we want your label, so that we can ensure that everything is okay and the product is allowed to be shipped. We also check the electrical ratings because Saudi Arabia operates at 220 volts and 60 hertz. So it's different than most other countries. So we need to make sure that the product labeling and the electrical ratings are including that voltage and frequency combination so that the equipment can operate. All right. One more question that I have on the CITC process for ITE category. If you're supposed to follow the CITC process, do you still go through SALEEM SABER process? Yes. So it would be another prerequisite again for IT products to go through CIT first, and it's only certain products. It's equipment that is connected to a network. So things like hubs and switches and routers, those types of things are what is under the CITC scheme. So they need CITC first, and then they can go through the SALEEM product certification. And I think that's all for right now. So with that, you can still ask questions and I'll get to them at the end, but now I will go through South Africa. So South Africa, and by the way, the reason I chose these two countries is because the regulations are complex and they are changing, and some of them are new. So I felt like these are two countries that I get the most questions about. And so I thought it would be good to take a deeper dive into these two countries. I could have just done one, but it would have not filled an hour. So that's why you get two. All right, so now South Africa. We'll start with the country information, introduction of the NRCS safety scheme, then the EMC scheme by SABS, and then finally ICASA, which is the wireless scheme. And I think I might have included a slide on energy efficiency at the end, but didn't put it in my contents. So we have electrical information here. So South Africa operates at 230 volts and 50 hertz, and the plug requirement is a Australian standard SANS 164 series, which is harmonized, by the way, with the European standards. Interesting fun fact about South Africa is they have 3 different capital cities. So Pretoria is where their administrative branch of their government is located. Cape Town is where the legislative branch is located. And then Bloemfontein is where the judicial branch of their government is located. So interesting fun fact about South Africa there. So here we have a list of their mandatory certification schemes. So the safety and energy efficiency are both handled by NRCS, and it's called an LOA. LOA stands for Letter of Authority. And this is mandatory for all electrical products that are, I can't say all AC related, but I'll get into the scope in just a couple of minutes. Then we will talk about the EMC and radio and telecom. So for EMC, it's controlled by SABS, which stands for South Africa Bureau of Standards. This is a certificate of conformity, a CoC. Or if you have a wireless or telecom product, it would fall under ICASA, which I can't remember what it stands for, but we will get to that on the ICASA slide. And it is also a mandatory scheme. So now we will move into NRCS safety. So the key points here are that a letter of authority is required for all products in order to be sold in South Africa, all regulated products. It's issued based on testing to IEC or, well, yes, just IEC test reports. There are some ways that we can work with a European test report if you have one, but it requires a declaration letter from the lab that issued the European test report that the product complies with the IEC standards. And the LOA requires an in-country representative. So if you don't have a local representative, that's where we can also help you out with providing that service. The standards that are in scope of the LOA scheme are, well, the main standards are listed here. These are the most common ones, but it's not all inclusive. There are some additional ones, but pretty much all products that we see on a regular basis are listed here. So your household, your audio, video, tools, lighting, equipment, IT, laboratory equipment, motor operated tools, and transformers power supplies all require the safety LOA approval. The South Africa certification process starts with an application. You need a local supplier, and they need to be registered in the NRCS database before they can apply for a certificate. The registration is valid for 3 years. So once your supplier is registered and your certificate is applied for, then that certificate is also registered in the database. That's how they control products coming through customs. The lead time is 120 working days. This is not a typo. We've seen a little bit faster approval times periodically, but recently it's been, more like the 4 to 6 month time frame that we're getting certificates. And this is mainly due to bureaucracy, red tape that they have to go through. And some will say that it has to do with trade barrier, where they want to give the local South African countries a chance to get their product approved first before they will let foreign product get approval and foreign product in. That's just speculation. Market surveillance is required. This is where they will buy a product off the shelf and do some testing on that product and just make sure that it is in compliance with the standard. So if your product isn't sold in a store, the likelihood of you coming up against market surveillance is very slim. The renewal process is based on just a paperwork process, and it must be started 3 months before the expiration. Otherwise, a new application would be required. The required documentation is pretty simple, actually, for the LOA. It's just your reports and certificates, and also the test reports for your critical components in some cases are required, but local rep information also, but pretty simple list. This is what the certificate looks like. It's just a letter of authority. There's no marking or anything for the LOA. This document would accompany all of your shipments, or a copy of this would accompany your shipments through customs. Now we'll talk about the SABS EMC scheme. One question I got here, does NRCS LOA accept IECEE 62368? Yes, they do. In fact, they recently made it mandatory. I think actually when the European date of cessation for 623 or for 6950 or 60065 comes up in December 20th. That's also when the South Africa certificates must be updated. So, or when they'll stop accepting the 6950 standards. So starting in December, 62368 will be mandatory for South Africa. And then I had another question, are the 60335 standards synchronized with the IECEE? Yes, they, or are they the same edition? I believe so. The bottom line here is that the IECEE 60335 standards are accepted, but it needs to be the latest standard. So if a standard has been replaced, then you need to update your report if you don't have the latest report. Okay. So on to SABS EMC. So let's see, it was in 2019 that SABS issued their latest regulation. There was a time period where the EMC regulations weren't being implemented, and it lasted quite a few years actually. So they finally got it together and implemented a new regulation in 2019, which requires the testing to be performed at SABS accredited laboratories. So this means that if you want to sell your product in South Africa, and this is for pretty much every electrical product, you need to have your testing done at a SABS accredited lab, which there haven't checked recently. The last time I checked, there were maybe 15 labs in the US that were accredited. So not every lab is SABS accredited. Like for us at TÜV-STÜD, it's only our Minnesota lab that's accredited in the US. The other labs that are accredited are overseas. So something to note. All right, so a certificate of compliance must accompany the product through customs in order to be sold or to be shipped to Saudi or South Africa. So in the case where a product falls under the safety and the EMC regulations, which is most products, then you need a SABS EMC CoC and you need an NRCS LOA, both of them with your shipment. And they are both valid for 3 years, by the way, so. Next slide. Regulated products for SABS is all electronic products that fall under the EMI and EMC environment. So basically anything with a circuit board requires approval. Another thing to note is that SABS and ICASA, which is the wireless certification body, have an MOU in place. MOU stands for Memorandum of Understanding. This means that if your product is wireless and falls under, or even a network equipment, so a telecom network equipment, if it falls under ICASA regulations, then ICASA replaces SABS. It's enough. So let me repeat that. If you require an ICASA certificate, you don't have to get a SABS certificate. If your product is not wireless and does not fall under ICASA, then SABS is mandatory. So when I talk a little bit more about ICASA in a minute, you'll see why this is important. So the SABS EMC certification process is a little odd and noteworthy. The first step is that an application number must be obtained from SABS before testing. This application number will be in the photos during your EMC testing. So it can't be photoshopped in. You can't add it just to the test report. It has to be physically in the photos of the testing. So you can't use a test report even from a lab that has the SABS accreditation later on. You have to have this number ahead of time. And then once the testing is finished, the report is issued. The report is submitted back to SABS for approval, and then they issue their certificate. It's valid for 3 years. Let's see, the next slide has some extra details. So documentation required is your application form, your copy of your remittance, which this is the ID number, and EMC report, and then an authorization letter if you're using an agent. Certificate limitations. So multiple factories are allowed, but only 4 models are to be listed on one certificate. So if you have a family of more than 4 models, you would need multiple certificates. SABS. Still, if all of the models are represented by your testing, you know, like let's say you have 10 different marketing models for one product and they're all physically identical and covered, then you still only have to do the testing once. You just have to have additional certificates because it's limited to 4 models. And here again, you must have a local representative to be listed as your certificate holder. This is a picture of what the certificate looks like. I know it's tiny and not easily read, but it is basically a declaration, and this requires the product. It doesn't require any labeling. It's just a document that gets sent with the product through customs. And then finally, we will talk about ICASA certification for wireless and telecom products. So key points here are that type approval is granted for products that meet the minimum set of regulatory, technical, and safety requirements. And it's required before a product can be sold or used in South Africa. The name of the authority, here we go, Independent Communications Authority of South Africa. That's what ICASA stands for. Type approval is required for radio equipment, telecom equipment, and this is what the mark looks like in the background. So anything that connects to the public telecommunications or anything that has a wireless transmitter. The documentation is submitted to ICASA along with test reports. If you don't already have test reports, then we would need to issue test reports. They can be RNTTE test reports, but really it's now red test reports. I don't know any lab that's issuing RNTTE directive reports. So let's just go with red. And then 62368 here is applicable and acceptable and mandatory starting in December. Local representative is required and must be registered with ICASA as a supplier of equipment. And ICASA certificates are valid indefinitely as long as the product remains unchanged. So this is an important point. Also an important point is that there is no requirement that this testing be done at a SABS accredited lab. This is ICASA, and ICASA accepts European test reports. So this is why it's important if you have a wireless product that you don't have to do the SABS testing at the SABS accredited lab. You can just use any accredited lab for the EN and IECE standards. Labeling, there is that ICASA label that must be on an outside surface of the equipment and packaging. And there is a post-market surveillance, but again, this is where they buy products off the shelf and evaluate them to make sure that they are in compliance with the applicable standards. So if your product is not sold on shelves in stores, then it's unlikely that you would ever see post-market surveillance. The required documentation is here. User manual in English, photos of the equipment, your radio, EMC, and safety reports are all required. Functional description of the equipment, technical docs, again, copy of remittance, and authorization letter. Somebody just asked, and thank you for asking, Thomas, does ICASA have an MOU with NRCS for safety? No, they do not. So even though the radio reports are required here, these are RF, EMC, and safety reports. If your product falls under the safety LOA scheme, you still have to have a safety certificate in addition to the ICASA certificate. So the MOU only covers the EMC piece of this. And this is what the certificate looks like. It is an actual certificate with a license number there. The labeling requirement is here. It needs to be on the outside of equipment, and it must be fixed to the equipment before it's made for sale or supplied in any other manner. This also means that the products that come in for trade shows, they have to have ICASA before they can be sent into Saudi Arabia or South Africa. I did it, I knew I would. The marking looks like this on the top right, and it has to have the ICASA logo, the ICASA license number, that's the one at the top. The TA stands for type approval. The next part is the year issued, and then the last part is a sequential number issued by the authority. And the minimum size of the label should be 3 millimeters high and 3 millimeters, or the logo itself, sorry, is 3 millimeters high and wide. And the certificate number needs to be at least 1 millimeter. So the overall label should be a 1:2 ratio. And I think that about covers it. So I would like to offer some free information. You can stay informed. We have a global market access ebook, which is really helpful to define what requirements different countries have for your specific product types, and what the label requirement, or sorry, what the regulated product lists are, what the test report requirements are, or if there's in-country testing. Super nice. And you may contact me with any questions about this, and here's my email address. So I'm going to go over to the questions now. Okay, let's see. A note for recent ICASA certification process, both both the interval to review and obtain the certificate and interval to purchase labels are significant. It took us more than 12 weeks. Good to know. So on that note, if you do a label, put the ICASA label in your rating label, if you incorporate it into your own label, it's an easier process. So I believe, though, that it's a 12-week time frame for purchasing labels. It seems that everything in South Africa is on the slow side. A question from Simon. Does the ICASA label need to go on the product, or can it be placed on the package? So ICASA logo should be on the product. If the product is very small, like let's say the size of a thumb drive or smaller, then it's possible to put it on the packaging. But if at all possible, it needs to go on the product. And a question from Ken, do you have to do safety twice, once for ICASA and once for NRCS? Great question. The answer is no. You submit the same test report, but you have to submit the safety test report as part of the ICASA submittal, and you also submit the safety test report as part of the NRCS safety submittal. So you don't test twice, but you send the reports twice. But there's only really one safety certification, and that's the NRCS. The other is, it's just the safety report is required essentially because you need the safety report to meet the radio equipment directive, and therefore, you know, when you submit your radio equipment directive red report, safety is in that group of reports. Okay, so I think it's time to move on to our next presentation. So once again, you can contact me here at teresa.glenna@tuvsud.com for any questions. And thank you all for your time and attention. I appreciate it.
For all those staying, Teresa will now present her next presentation. Wireless Goes Global.
Who is the, are you doing it, Glenna?
I'm doing it. Yes, 3 in a row.
Okay, so we have a, this is Bansi. Again, Glenna, thank you for the excellent presentation, good question and answers, interaction and everything. And I would suggest to all the attendees that if you really want to have some reference book, the GMA, the Global Market Access ebook, is really nice, detailed information, is very useful. So I would recommend you to go to a TUV site and download ebook. I know it's a link there, but I don't know if you can, if you have the presentation and you can download the link. But again, Glenna, thank you very much. And if we're gonna dive into next one, Glenna is still the, it looks like a day host for presenting. She's gonna talk about wireless. So I would, and Glenna is with TV Sud if somebody joined in and haven't attended the first 2 sessions. She's been helping, she's a permanent part of our ISPC and Product Safety Engineering Society. She always comes up with 2-3 presentations and very flexible in timing.